Hi guys, in this video I'm going to teach you how to make a snowy base. Now I know that looking at it, it may seem like a lot of materials, but I promise the effect is worth it. So starting from the top, we have PVA glue, gel super glue, black primer, Testor's lusterless flat varnish, Mod Podge with luster, scenery glue, two different sands, one with a fine grain and one with a medium grain, snow flock, iridescent micro glitter, brown leaf scatter, Army Painter grass tufts, some paints and washes in shades of black and gray, orchid bark, which can also be called pine bark, and of course whatever base you'll be using. I'll also be using an airbrush for part of this tutorial, but you can achieve almost the same effect by doing a dry brush method. So get yourself some old brushes and let's get started. Okay, so this is the orchid bark I use. You can find it in a home improvement or garden store. It might also be called pine bark in your area. Right now I'm just positioning some chunks around on the base, trying to figure out what position I like them in and where it won't conflict with the model's feet. Of course, you can have it so your model will be standing on it in the end. You just have to do a little bit more cover up to hide any gap. This is the model I'm going to use. Right now I'm just placing it on the base to make sure I like the effect. I like to do my bases separate from the model. It makes both processes a lot easier since you're not worrying about any gaps or hard to reach areas on the model to paint, and you can go kind of crazy with it and not have to cover anything up. Once I'm happy with where the rocks are going to go, I'm going to use gel super glue to stick them down. I like gel super glue because I feel like it has a little bit more hold, and I'm super clumsy, so if I use the regular, I'm going to glue my fingers together. Once you've got them stuck on there, make sure you give it plenty of time to dry, or else in the next step you risk getting super glue on your brushes, and that's never fun to clean off. So next up, we're going to use my favorite glue, Elmer's Glue All, but you can use any PVA glue you have. And this is a fine sand. It's actually just play sand that I've sifted to get some smaller particles. And this is the larger sand that I sifted out. As you can see, it's got a pretty good mix of large rocks and small rocks, anything that didn't go through the sifter. You are also going to want to use your crappiest old brush for this. Of course, PVA glue and Elmer's glue is water-based, so it washes off, but why take the chance of ruining a brush if you don't have to? So just go ahead and glob your glue right on there. Try not to make it so it's flowing over the sides, but you want a pretty good amount. You can always add more, but remember it's hard to take it away once it's out of the bottle. Once it's on there, use your brush and just push it around so it's in all the gaps. If you get some on the orchid bark, do not worry about it, it's just going to add to that natural look. As you can see, I'm using a crap ton of glue, like a lot of glue. That's because I have a lot of time on my hands, and I don't really care how long it takes to dry. I also don't want to worry about rocks falling off later because I didn't use enough glue, so I always feel like it's safer to go a little bit overboard than underboard. You know what I mean? Alrighty, so once your glue is spread out, we're going to start putting some rocks on. I'm going to put a little piece of paper down just so I cannot make a huge mess on my workstation and pour any rocks that fall off back into the container. Starting with the larger rocks, I'm just going to build up a couple key areas with them, just so they've got that sort of like rocky variation feel. I'm not going to cover the whole base with these though. Don't worry too much about where they go either, just kind of let them be where they're going to be, and it'll look great in the end, I promise. Once the large rocks are on there, literally cover the rest of it in a mountain of sand. You do not want any uncovered areas after this step, so just make sure you got underneath the orchid bark boulders as well. And then while the glue is still wet, just tap off the excess. This is where that piece of paper comes in handy so you can pour it right back into the container. I forgot to mention earlier that if you're messy like me and have some glue over the sides of the base, just wipe it off now or right after the rocks are applied, because if you try and wipe it off after the glue is dried, it is going to take chunks of rocks with it. Alrighty, so this next step is optional, and I apologize for the label being hard to read, but this is scenery glue. This is a mix of 1 part PVA glue to 3 parts distilled water with 1 drop of dish soap added for viscosity. Adding the scenery glue helps to keep any loose particles affixed to your base, like if you had a rock that was a little bit wobbly and didn't glue itself down all the way, this is going to make it stick in for good. But you guys saw how much glue I used, so I'm pretty safe. I'm just kind of adding this as an extra measure. Also, since I'm using play sand, it can be a little bit dusty, and this helps keep the dust down. I'm just using a little 3 milliliter dropper pipette that you can get at any craft store or online to apply some spots of this on the base. It's going to disperse itself between the rocks, so don't worry about covering the whole thing with this mixture. Also, do not touch the gravel once this stuff is on there before it is completely dry, because the water in this is going to reactivate that Elmer's glue and it's going to become wiggly until it's dry, so just leave it alone. After they're completely dry, as you can see, I primed them black and we're going to start airbrushing. Like I said before, this is optional. You can achieve the same effect with dry brushing. So I just picked out a few shades of gray to use: Eshin Gray, Dawnstone, and Celestra Gray. And I'm also going to be using Airbrush Flow Improver to get them working in my airbrush, since they are not the air versions, but that's okay. So first up, we're just going to be using straight Eshin Gray, and technical difficulties there with the lid. I do love these paints, but the pot can be really annoying. So I'm just going to add a couple brushfuls in it right to my airbrush pot. You can kind of see how much I used there. And then a few drops of Flow Improver. I used about 4. And then a little bit of water. Then I'm just going to use my crappy brush and give it a mix. And once it's mixed, I'm going to go ahead and use the backflow technique by covering the tip with my finger and running some air through it so it percolates and mixes up any bits you may have missed at the bottom. So I kind of had my pressure too high to start. I think I was about at like 40 psi and I turned it down to around 20. You can see me setting it down and messing with it a lot. I haven't done a ton of airbrushing, but I'm trying to get into it. So it's more practice for me. Sorry if this isn't really helpful for you. So I'm spraying from the top down, just giving it a good cover of Eshin Gray, leaving not much black showing, but any that would be in the cracks is still going to show through. So you get a little bit of natural shadows. Once they're covered, I'm going to add Dawnstone to this mix and going for about a 50-50 ratio of the Eshin Gray and Dawnstone. Same thing as before, I'm just going to use my old paintbrush to add a couple of brushfuls to the pot that already still has Eshin Gray in it. Once again, technical difficulties with that stupid lid, but that's alright. You can kind of see how much I use. It's about 50-50, no need to be precise. And I'm adding a little bit more water, but I already had enough Flow Improver to make it work. Percolating the pot again, and as you can see, the Eshin Gray layer isn't completely dry, so I'm just going to use my airbrush to blow a little air on it and help it dry out a little bit. It's okay if the colors mix, so it doesn't have to be completely dry, but just a little bit more set than it was. So this time I'm going to focus on the tops of the rocks and the clusters of the larger sandy stones that we did. I'm not going to apply this color to the entire base. Like before, I'm just going to apply this at a 45 to 90 degree angle from the top down, just so I get the natural shadows staying in the creases. And once I've got a layer down on all of my bases, I'm going to go ahead and hit it with this mixture a second time just to brighten it up a little bit. The Flow Improver and the water in your mix will make it a little more translucent, and it wasn't quite as bright as I wanted it to be, so I'm going to pop those colors out with the second layer. After this step, we are going to clean out the pot and go with a new mix. So my next layer is going to be a 50-50 mix of Dawnstone and Celestra Gray. I'm going to prepare this the exact same way as the other mixes, with about 50-50 of each color, some Flow Improver, and some water. Mix, mix, mix with your crappy brush. Remember to shake your paints and adding the Celestra Gray in. Mix, 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 and backflow again. And once again, we are working so fast that the first layer isn't dry. We're going to use our airbrush to blow a little bit of air on it. We are going to apply this color same as before, only on the tops of the biggest rocks. from about a 45 to 90 degree angle from the top down. As you can kind of start to tell now, we've got some really great shadows in the rocks. I love orchid bark for this. It works perfectly for making rocks and big boulders. Once again, just blowing a little air on it and adding a second layer of that color to really make it pop. And now we have icy rocks. Once that paint is dry, we're going to make a wash. I've got my shot glass mixing glass right here, and we're going to use some Nuln oil and that dirty paint water from cleaning your airbrush. So using my trusty pipette, I'm going to make a 3-to-1 mix with dirty paint water to Nuln oil. You could use pure black wash if you wanted the shadows to be a little deeper, but I like this mix. It's what I did on the rest of my army, so I'm just going to keep doing it. And I'm going to absolutely slather this in wash. I probably used a little bit too much, to be honest, but that's okay. If you want to speed up the drying time, you can use a hairdryer, but just make sure you're using it on the lowest setting. Otherwise, the heat can cause the plastic to warp. Been there, done that. It is not fun. As you can tell, this wash is pretty light, but it's still working its way into all the cracks in that orchid bark and giving us a cool rocky texture. On that little 40 centimeter base, I kind of screwed up and didn't let the paint dry enough on the top of that big rock, so the wash sort of wiped it away, but it's okay. Since we had the black primer on there, it looked alright in the end. I'm just going to fix it afterwards with some snow and other effects. I wasn't happy with the haloing I had around the rocks in the end, so I went back in with my airbrush and cut in some Abaddon black just in the creases so it didn't really look like the rocks were glowing. I also hit the tops of a couple of the boulders in the biggest, deepest cracks and creases to really maximize that effect. Once we've got the snow on there, you're not really going to see a lot of this in the end, so don't worry if you're not happy with a certain spot. You can cover it up and make it look awesome. If I weren't doing snow, I would probably add in maybe some dark browns, light browns, and greens to give it more of a summertime feel, but this is a great starting point for practically any base. Alrighty, you can see they are completely dry, and we are going to go ahead and glue down our model at this stage. I'm using gel super glue once again, just at the bottoms of their feet. If you do want it to sit on top of the rocks, just use a little bit of extra glue, kind of as gap filler, but be aware it's going to take longer to dry. So once that super glue is dry, the fun, creative part begins. This is my favorite part, to be honest. So I'm going to be using a few different colors of Army Painter grass tufts, and to be honest, I'm not sure if they still make the style that's in those smaller ones, but I like them because the grass is a little more spread out and natural feeling. So I'm just going to make a little glob of PVA glue off to the side, just so I can dip and stick my tufts. For the best effect, you want to use a couple different colors and 2 or 3 of each, just to give it the most natural look. I'm going for kind of like a winter meadow feeling, so maybe it's the first or second snow of the season that's already fallen and melted and frozen over again, and the plants have kind of started to die off, and you can just kind of see them in the cracks of the rocks where they've managed to hold on and survive. It's very dark, perfect for beast claw. I'm just using some tweezers to peel these off the plastic backing, and for these older style, separating them into smaller chunks. Do not pay attention to the self-adhesive part, it is a lie. Definitely use glue to stick these on. I'm going to apply these mostly right around the boulders because in nature the flat areas would have died back, and where they had some natural shelter under the rocks they would have survived. Starting with one color, try and apply them so that they are on opposite sides of the base. If you group your clusters together, it won't look quite as natural. Just dip them in your glue and stick them straight on. Push them down a little bit so they get really good adherent. The older style ones, since they're a little more spread out, can be a little harder to stick down, but I like them because they look more like real grass to me than some of the clumps do. The newer clumps are perfect for like summer that's growing really well, but the older clumps are sparse and I like them better for fall and winter. Also, you can see here there's a little bit of a gap underneath my model's feet. We are going to cover that up with some snow later, so don't worry about it. If you've got any excess glue, remember it's going to dry clear and we are still going to be adding to this, so it's no big deal. You can be messy. It is okay. Try and apply the grass so that you have some on every side of the base. I like it so you can see grass from every angle. And this is what it looks like with my grass chunks on there. Alright, so this next step is really fun. I have some brown leaf scatter I made with the Green Stuff World leaf punch, and don't worry, I will do a video on this someday. But if you don't have any leaf scatter, I don't know, just use like some crushed up herbs, dirt, who cares, whatever you have lying around. We are going to apply these with some more PVA glue and an old brush. I'm going to be focusing on these big bare areas that I still have, as well as a couple leaves on top of some of the rocks. My thought is, like, it's just early winter after fall, there's a tree nearby, leaves fell. It's going to look really cool with the snow on there, believe me. So I'm just making some globs of PVA glue straight on my base, and I'm going to dip my brush into the leaves and get a few out. Don't like stir your brush around or else you're going to make some glue clumps and it'll be hard to use later, but this is the easy way that I've found to apply them. Try and get like some good piles of leaves with a few singles here and there, just make it look natural, and then a couple on top of the rocks as well. You don't need to go crazy with these since we are going to be covering them up, but just make a few really good clusters. They're a little finicky and you might need to apply more or less and get them saturated with some paint to really stick, but they're going to look awesome. Same as the grass, just apply them all around the base so you can see some from every angle. And try and think about where they would build up naturally, like around the bottoms of the rocks and around the grass tufts where they would have blown and stuck. This is what it looks like when they're on there. Give this a little bit of time to dry, but you can apply your snow right after this. It doesn't have to be completely dry. So I am using Gale Force 9 Snowflock, but they're pretty much all the same, so use whichever snowflock you have. My secret ingredient is this micro glitter, and I apologize my camera is having a really hard time picking up the shine, but believe me, it really makes it look cool. You can find the glitter at like a craft store, or I just got mine off of eBay. So we're going to be using both PVA glue and this Mod Podge gloss, but if you can't find it in your country, don't worry, just the PVA glue will do. I think this gloss luster version just gives it a little bit of extra added shine. I'm using this little container. Just scoop some of your snowflock in and add a little bit of glitter. You can always add more later if it's not quite as shiny as you want. I think I'm doing about like a 1 to 5 glitter to snow mix right now. And I'm going to go for about 1 part PVA glue to 3 parts Mod Podge. And if you're almost out of glue like me, it's going to go all over like that. These are not exact ratios, you're just looking for a good mix. It's going to dry the same, the only difference is how it applies. You don't want it to be too runny because it's just going to run off the edges. Just give it a stir, 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 and I'm going to check the texture. As you can see, it's a little bit runnier than I want right now, so what I'm going to do is add an extra pinch of my snow in. After mixing that in, you can see it's a little bit more gloopy, and this is about the perfect texture that I've found for this method. So it still runs into itself, but doesn't move too much on its own, so it's going to be easy to apply. Just going to use my old paintbrush again and glob some straight onto the base. I'm going to cover up probably like 75% of the surface area. Over the leaves and most of the ground, you can also take your paintbrush and lightly apply some to the tops of the grass for a frosty effect. Looks super cool. You don't need to cover up 100% of everything, have some like obviously showing through, but when it dries it's going to be clear and snowy and it's going to look icy and perfect. If you're brave, you can even apply some of this to the model. I'm not going to in this video, but I am going to stick some of the snow in the gaps underneath the feet. You can see I got some on its foot right there, but that's okay. This snow is a great gap filler, so if you did have a big crack where it's standing on top of the rock and the foot looks super weird, just fill it in with snow and you're not even going to be able to tell. And just work your way around the base, make it look natural. Have I said that word enough times in this video yet? Probably. This is what it looks like when the snow is on there. Remember, this glue is going to dry clear inside the snow, so it's going to look a little bit icier than it does now. The last step is to apply some of the snow flock over this glue while it's still wet. That helps give it that fresh snow effect. If you don't want to apply the snow flock back on top, it's going to look more like icy, frosted snow. Just make sure you cover it all up with some snow flock and then tap off the excess. As you can see, I'm working over a piece of paper again just so I can pour any stuff that falls off right back into the pot. And here's what it looks like. We are pretty much finished at this stage. Cool, huh? The last step, well, second to last, is just use whatever black paint you have lying around to finish up that edge of the base. I'm using this airbrush black paint because it has surprisingly good coverage and goes on smooth, but any black paint will do. Having a black edge really helps draw the focus back into the model. You can do whatever color fits your army, but I always do black. I just think it looks the best. Alright, and very last step, we are going to use Model Master Lusterless Flat Coat to seal in everything and really protect our model. And that's it, the base is done. I really wish the glitter was coming through better on these photos, but I think it still looks awesome. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. See you guys soon!